Imagine following your curiosity so far that it takes you from the forest floor to the microscopic world inside your gut, and then out into the ceremonial space of psychedelic mushrooms. That's not a hypothetical. That's Eugenia Bone's real life. Her latest book, Have a Good Trip, isn't just about psilocybin. It's about people, culture, science, and the weird, wonderful places that mushrooms take us if we keep asking the right questions. This is curiosity as a lifestyle. This is the kind of thinking that changes how you see fungi and maybe yourself forever. Yo, welcome to the MycoGeeky Podcast, where we explore the fascinating world of mushrooms and the people who love them. From expert cultivators to passionate foragers, we bring you deep conversations, cutting-edge insights, and everything mycology. Whether you're a seasoned mycophile or just curious, we invite you to geek out with us on the wonders of fungi and join the mushroom movement. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the MycoGeeky Podcast. The show where obsessing over fungi is less of a hobby and more like a full-time job that pays exclusively in spore prints. I'm your host, MycoGeeky, here to help you dig deeper into the world of mushrooms and cultivation so you can take your at-home mushroom game from, God, I love these little things, to, I just sold my house so I could buy a Sprinter van and absolutely crush every single myco-blitz on Earth. Sorry. We've got an epic show for you tonight, so go grab your lab coat or your favorite hoodie, and let's get growing. We got a special one for you tonight, because our guest has spent the last decade plus not just writing about fungi, but living in their orbit. Tonight, we're sitting down with Eugenia Bone, the author of Mycophilia, Microbia, and her brand new book, Have a Good Trip. Eugenia isn't just here to tell you mushrooms are fascinating. She's proof that staying curious can completely change your relationship with the natural world. In her book, Mycophilia, she pulls us into the quirky, passionate subculture of mycophiles, people who know the difference between a Psilocybe and a Xericomelus, and will happily tell you the difference and why it matters. In Microbia, she went microscopic, returning to college to study microbiology, showing us that you don't need a lab coat and a grant to think like a scientist. And now, with Have a Good Trip, she's exploring the psychedelic frontier, sharing stories, science, and soul-searching from ceremonies, citizen scientists, and the deeply human need to understand ourselves. She's been part of this mushroom-loving community for years, from foragers to cultivators to psychonauts, and she's one of the few people who can move fluidly between those worlds without getting stuck in the hype or the gatekeeping. For the cultivators out there, this isn't just about trippy stories. Have a Good Trip offers a wide-angle lens on what your work means, why growing mushrooms, psychedelic or not, matters beyond the yield. For those interested in sacred fungi, her take on ethics, safety, and transparency is refreshingly real. And for anyone who's ever felt like they're just not a scientist, Eugenia's career proves that curiosity is the only credential you really need to start asking better questions. But before we jump in, a quick heads up, guys. Most of the deep dive actives cultivation content, past, present, and future, lives exclusively on my Patreon now. That's where we can really get into the fine points without the algorithm blowing a gasket over spore swabs or fruiting chamber picks. My YouTube channel still gets all the totally legal cultivation, interviews, field adventures, and the usual fungal weirdness. So if you want both worlds, hop over to patreon.com/MycoGeeky and help keep this mushroom movement growing. Now subscribe, hit like, bell me, and let's get into it. All right, welcome to the show, Eugenia Bone. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Geeky.
I am really excited to have you on the show for a multitude of reasons, most of which is this brand new book, Have a Good Trip. As you well know, anybody in my little world, if they hear the word trip, they get instantly curious and interested in what's going on. So I had to grab the book, check it out. I had a while back read Mycophilia and thought that was a really cool book. Really did a great job of exposing the world to that world of the mycophile and all the ways that can unfold, if you happen to be one of these people who love mushrooms. So I'm excited to have you here. Can't wait to dig in. I just, again, I know you're a busy woman and you got a lot going on. Plus, you're a mycophile, so I already know you got 1,000 things going on at any given moment. So, thank you, truly, thank you for being here. All right, so let's get into some initial questions here. So, from my perspective, I look at all these broad mainstream books about this new, mushroom psychedelic renaissance we're in, but even beyond that, just a general interest. I think COVID had a bit to do with this, where people decided they needed new hobbies. And because both of the psychedelic renaissance, all this new research, and it kind of hit in the mainstream, I think just a lot of people sort of influxed into this world of the mycophile. So if I look at all these books that have been written, I don't think there's too many people that have done 3 books in a relatively short period of time, all either directly or roughly focused on this world of mycology, microbes, all that stuff. I really feel like you're doing going above and beyond helping the broader public fall in love a little bit more with mushrooms, or maybe fall in love with mushrooms for the first time.
I started out in my career as a food writer, and my beat, and this is when there were food magazines, and I wrote for many of them. And my beat was foraged foods, hunting, gathering kind of stuff. And so I wrote about duck hunting and boar hunting and mushroom hunting, and over time I became less interested in pursuing critters that flee and more interested in pursuing critters that hide. And so mushroom hunting became something I was more and more interested in. And the only way to get wild mushrooms was to collect it. To get a lot of the culinary mushrooms I was interested in was to collect in the wild. In order to collect them in the wild, I had to learn something about why they grew where they grew. And that led me down the wormhole of mycology, which I know many of your listeners have fallen into. I mean, it's a fascinating world. So Mycophilia, even though I'm a journalist and I write I write nonfiction, often with a narrative kind of format. But ultimately, I follow my curiosity. And I would say that is from a writer's perspective, curiosity is like your destiny. So I went from wild, having interest in wild foods to falling down the wormhole of mycology. And then mycology is just a gateway drug to microbiology because, fungi are microscopic, but the mushroom is macroscopic. And so then I got very curious about what lies beneath, what is the unseen, the role of the unseen world in our lives and in the environment and the atmosphere. And that led me to write a book called Microbia, which is me just trying to grasp the basic jobs that bacteria have in our world. It was mind blowing for me to realize that some things like bacteria bridge the abiotic and biotic spheres. I mean, it was, I was getting really philosophical about it. I remember something that may lead me into my next book, which I can't really talk about, but there's my son at one point said, it makes more sense that God isn't one big entity, but billions and billions of tiny ones. So I was really like having a great time thinking about bacteria in all these different ways. And I had long ago wanted to write about, really after mycophilia, wanted to write about psychedelic mushrooms. I think it was like maybe 2014 or something, I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times arguing for rescheduling psilocybin because of what was happening in the academic studies, at Johns Hopkins and so on. And I also wrote about my own experiences, how I benefited from a particular trip and some of the revelations that occurred. Um, and the response was enormous. I mean, I got all these emails and texts and people trying to find my phone number. And it was the first time they had heard of this um, this therapeutic aspect of magic mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms. And it was overwhelming. And I thought, wow, there's a real need here. And I wanted to write a book. And so I started working on the proposal and all that business. And then my agent said, Michael Pollan's interested in the subject. And so I was like, okay. And I didn't address it. But then what happened, Myco, is that um, his book came out, How to Change Your Mind, which reported on all primarily these academic studies that were emerging that were showing great therapeutic values to psilocybin mushrooms, and people were getting really excited. But there was no information about like using them safely, or just what the facts were about their use, what the anecdotal stuff was, which is mainly it, but the results of big surveys that could tell people about the efficacy of stuff like microdosing. People are just taking this stuff. And so that was the inspiration, or the motivation for writing Have a Good Trip, which is no advocacy, no sales to do or not do this drug. It's just a resource. Here's what's known, here's what's unknown, and here's what's unknowable.
The first page, right? And this is, I think I'm going to reflect an attitude in my community, which is I read the disclaimer page for Have a Good Trip, and I go, "Pah, the lawyers and the system and the bureaucracy and the horrible scheduling rules. This page shouldn't even be here. Rip! I don't even want this page in here." But then I actually read the book, and I think it cannot be overstated how wonderful it is that you started as a journalist and are a journalist, I think, at your core, because you have such a every chapter could be its own thing. So another thing I want to tell viewers is, if you're not, and I have a lot of neurospicy people who watch the show, we don't always like to read books straight through. We like to look at the glossary or the table of contents and go, "Ooh, this chapter looks good." And I can tell you right now, all of your books, you can sort of do that. You can just grab a chapter, and there might be some a bit of text here and there that are building upon things you talked about previously, but you do a really good job of making each little side trip that you go on. I think Microbia is a good example of this, where um, you really each chapter gives you a new side wormhole to go down and look at this little aspect and that aspect. And by the time you're done with the books, you see this bigger picture. You see how complicated, mycophiles are, and that there's not one type of mycophile. Or with microbes are doing all sorts of things, and you don't see it. And so you do such a great job of bringing all this um, to the masses. And yes, particularly in Have a Good Trip, you do a great job of just, I really felt there was not too much in it that I hadn't at least roughly been familiarized with, but you gave me a deeper understanding of every part. Um, and, there was still like I knew about the people in Seattle and the Pacific Northwest who were knocking up patches and all that, but I'd never heard the term knockers. I'd never heard that. I thought that was cool. Um, but you do this really important thing, which is it is neutral. So for example, like, the church lady whose grandson buys her Have a Good Trip because she's got, a terminal cancer and she's only gonna be around for another year or 2. She is, in my opinion, more likely to keep reading that book because of that journalistic tone, almost, that introductory tone, that really holding someone's hand and bringing them in a way that you shows there's respect and occasionally reverence for what you're talking about, but there's no bias in it. Even though I'm sure for you personally, there were sentences you wanted to put in, but didn't. I just want to tell you that is a really wonderful quality in all your work, and I think it does what my community cares about, which is, like you're saying, rescheduling and advocacy and all that. It really does a lot for everybody else that isn't in our world. Um, yeah.
My audience, because, those are the folks that, are inspired by the headlines that say, "Oh, psilocybin may cure depression," and they're like, "Well, my, niece is falling out, dropping out of college and having a hard time. Maybe this would help." People need some. I think they benefit. They're hearing about the drug, so they benefit from some, resources. But I really, my my contract with the reader is not to be an advocate, because I don't know where you're at, and the last thing I'm going to do is recommend what you should do. I don't know you. I mean, I don't know what drugs you've taken. I don't know what your state of mind. And it's insane to even, for me, it was insane for me to step up and say that kind of thing. So I'm super careful in this book, and I really made every effort. And so in some ways those efforts piss people off in the community. For example, I won't say medicine. I do not call psilocybin a medicine. I don't call it an entheogen. I don't call it a shroom. And the reason why is because medicine, when you say medicine, it implies use. And if I said medicine, then I would be saying, I would essentially be advocating for a kind of use. If I said entheogen or sacrament, I'd be on a kind of subtle way advocating for a kind of use. And same thing with shroom, which to my ear implies that you're using it for mind expansion and, having a beautiful walk in the woods or going to dance, at a music festival or something like that, which is why I use drug, which is the only thing that's consistent, regardless of use. I use drug, I use psilocybin, I use magic mushrooms, but I only use words that imply advocacy when it's in quotes and it's somebody else's words, which they're, of course, entitled to. So there's a lot of things like that I employ in this book because I want people, because as I said, my contract is you get, I'm not sneaking in and, you know, advice or advocacy, kind of under the rug, where before you know it, you're thinking this is the right thing for you without really gathering the information and analyzing it for yourself.
Yes, that's exactly it. Every one of these books has the quality of, when you finish reading it, you truly feel that you have a wonderful overview of those worlds, whether it's the mycophiles world, whether it's the world of microbes, whether it's the world of the psychonaut, or those who are now, I guess psychonaut's probably too restrictive of a word, but yes, like those who have been drawn to psilocybin containing mushrooms for a variety of reasons. It gives you that overview, and I know you say that people are giving you a hard time for that. To me, it's a crucial role, because what I see over and over again, whether it's after, Michael Pollan's book gets turned into a Netflix special, and now I'm in the ER taking care of people, and people are bringing it up to me. They're talking about it in a healthcare setting out of nowhere, and I'm in my head, of course, I'm going, "Oh, you picked the right person to bring this up to." Uh, but it really is important to not do those things. It's important to not load all your language, because you could definitely turn some people off by doing that. "Oh, sacrament. Get out of here, lady. What are sacrament. I don't wanna hear that crap. I'm a devout Catholic. Don't talk to me about sacrament," and you know what I mean? So, that's really important that you do that, and I think you're doing our community a huge service by writing these books with that tone.
Yeah.
So, thank you for doing that.
Yeah. I think it's also important in regards to for those who want to see legalization of psilocybin to be utterly transparent, and not couch things in sales in this sort of persuasive language, ultimately serves the goal of legalization better. I think the general public is totally capable of making reasonable decisions. They don't need to be sold on stuff in order to determine whether or not they want to get behind it. And I run into the same problem when it comes to claims in the psychedelic kind of industry. So, for example, a retreat might claim to, come to our retreat, $1,000 a day, and will cure your chronic Lyme. One of the things I try to do in the book, and I do this in so many different ways, but in terms of claims, is I try to show how correlation can turn into a claim, correlative science. So, for example, in the case of the chronic Lyme, the retreat may post some scientific studies, and if you actually read those studies, I even describe how to read those studies in the book. I'm like, really get all your skills together. But if you read the study, it says that chronic Lyme, it may be the result of inflammation, brain inflammation. Then there's another study, totally unassociated from a different institution, that showed that brain inflammation was reduced by psilocybin in mice. Therefore, and here's where the retreat comes in, they will make that correlative claim that chronic Lyme can be cured by psilocybin. You see how that kind of thing happens. It happens a lot in the psychedelic industry, and I think it's just really useful to know that and to be able to analyze it. Because when I read something, when I read a claim or hear a claim in an interview, I have to check it out. I don't just print it up. And so in checking it out, that's where I follow these little, chains. This is like the reporter side of my personality is like, well, what is the it's just what makes that true, so following that chain, if I can show people how to do that, then I think those are the tools to make good choices, hopefully, for yourself.
Oh, the claims.
Yeah,
Yes, there are
it's so
many,
amazing,
right?
right?
Yes. It's like that phase when you're young and you're dating somebody new and they're wonderful, but your friend is going, "Yeah, but did you notice this? Did you notice that?" And you go, but, I'm so in love right now. Don't screw that up for me."
I know there's a lot of pushback against that, like it's a negative thing. I write the Substack. It's free. It's um, it has a name, but everyone just seems to call it Eugenia Bone. But the name of it is Food, Mushrooms, Microbes, Drugs, which is sort of my in areas of interest. And I have a current piece up right now that's sort of breaking down the origins of this metaphor, the mycelial network, you hear people saying a lot. Um, and, it's arguing for deeper understanding of mycology. So, and people understand what mycelium actually is, and that it's not by nature beneficent. It's as opportunistic as anything else in nature. There's been pushback, and there's been a lot of people who liked it. It kind of pinged around the internet a bit, but there's been some pushback because, I think folks are disappointed, like it's a downer, you know, but reality doesn't need to be seen as a downer. In fact, I think it's even more beautiful and exciting to know, to have a deeper understanding of nature.
All right, so you go back to school. You're reading scientific research. You're learning how to think more like a scientist, and there's no room for hopes and dreams in science. I mean, there's room for a hypothesis and a well orchestrated experiment, but many a time the hypothesis doesn't turn out well, and there are not many papers published on failed experiments that turned out to be complete flukes. And yet, those are very important research papers that never see the light of day that ultimately contribute to the paper that does get published and the hypothesis gets better and all that kind of stuff. I am I am with you 100%. I want the reality of it all because at no point in time am I deluded enough to think that if we just create this huge hype train around this and
Right, it'll
say
come true.
it's a miracle drug. What's your problem? You have cancer, it cures it. What's your problem? ADHD cures it. What's your problem? Spiritual depravity, it cures it. You just can't do that. There are people in this world that are immediately going to go bullshit.
Mhm.
So you can't ever paint this. It can't just be rose-colored glasses all the time.
It also just won't come out, I mean,
Yes.
and so there's so much, that's truly inspiring and incredible, just the mycology of, why psilocybin is in the mushroom. That in itself is to me kind of an amazing thing and has reverberations when you eat the mushroom. Why does it give you a little nausea? Well, it might be related to its evolutionary purpose. So, I think that to take off the colored glasses actually allow you to look through microscopic ones and see the world, the truly exciting and complex aspects of it. The problem is the learning curve, and that's where I try to be a little bit of a bridge for people because the learning curve is steep, and what I think I bring to these books is I'm just like kind of a regular person intellectually. I'm not I'm such a brainiac. I don't have all these advanced degrees and all. I mean, I literally had to go back to school to study. It wasn't microbiology because it was undergraduate level. I wasn't going to go to grad school to be a microbiologist. I just didn't even have the science. I was an English major, for God's sake. So I just took a kind of a course within an ecology department at my alma mater, and that was basic biology. Cell biology. I just couldn't, go from mycology, which is a little bit simpler than to microbiology, which was just on a whole different level for me. I couldn't read the papers. I was just getting so stuck. So I went back to school just to get my basic biology chops. So that's who I am. That's the voice I speak in. I don't I try not to use, I mean, I'm very anti jargon, mainly because I forget what jargon words mean or they drift in meaning, it seems. So, there's just not a lot of, uh, not a lot of complication in what I do, but it takes a lot of really precise thinking to make complicated concepts to put them in simple language. I really have to know as much as possible. I really have to know what I'm talking about in order to say it in a simple way. For me as a writer, and this is something that took me many years to figure out, is I can only write what I know. And it's very easy as a writer to kind of sometimes write your way through not knowing something and just sort of bullshit your way into a kind of amorphous, and that's where jargon is so useful. But the bottom line is that I got to a point in my life and career where I'd read what I go and write what I'd write, and I'd say, I don't know exactly what I'm talking about right now, and I had to stop and do what it took to really understand it. And then I could write in a much more simplified way what was going on. And that's my fun too. That's what I enjoy doing. So it's like a puzzle in a way.
I can tell you for a fact, anything that I've read from you that I feel I have any level of deep understanding or expertise on, there was never a crack There was
Oh, good.
never a flaw.
I
Oh,
worry about
no.
that all the time.
It's
This is true.
extremely well researched. At one point, I thought, "Man, she's had some harsh editors in her journalistic career 'cause, she
Ah,
just does her homework, and she is gonna make sure that what she turns in does not get, torn up or rejected 'cause
yeah.
it's
I didn't go
very
to
well
high
done."
school. I didn't go to I didn't study journalism, but I started out writing for the magazines. I wanted to be a writer. I didn't know what kind of writer. And so I would write anything for anybody. I was just doing beat reporting, just writing about stuff in New York City where I live. I did I wrote stuff that was really not right for me, like celebrity profiles. It's just not a good fit for me. I was always grumpy about doing them. And, but being a freelancer back when the time when I assume it's relative with internet, but when there was a lot of magazines, they were brutal. They didn't give a shit if your feelings were, and they were like, I'll buy this story or I won't buy it. I'm commissioning it, but if it turns out that it changed my mind, I'm going to give you a kill fee, and you're going to walk away with $100 in your pocket instead of 1,000. That kind of thing. So yeah, I learned to respect editors. This book, so Microbia wasn't actually edited, which is something that's happening in books right now, where they buy the manuscript and then they go straight to copy edit, and that's a problem because it's really important to have somebody read it and say, "This doesn't make sense to me." So Microbia is in a way a raw manuscript, straight from me. Mycophilia and Have a Good Trip were both edited by a woman named Pam Krause, who I've worked with over the years, and she is just the most brutal person. She'll read that and go, "This sounds like bullshit for me," to me, and that's it. Then it's up to me to make it not sound like bullshit. I think writers benefit from editors, and it's a real tragedy of writing for the internet, because content is so important that people just have to deliver, 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 and there's not that refining of the writer's voice. And I think editors help do that. I don't
Yeah.
know where that's all going, but for me, I've benefited from people like Pam Krause in my life.
Well, I'll tell you where it goes, and I agree. My anything I wrote in undergrad at U of M, uh, only got better in a workshop, right?
Yeah,
Getting feedback, soliciting
yeah,
feedback, and being challenged, and being told how it was interpreted, and go back the
yeah,
anything great I ever wrote came from the revision process, for
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
That raw dump, that's where it starts, but that's not where.
But it's you also, it's like being an actor in a way. You have to really like toughen up and say, I want to do this well, regardless of how much it destroys my ego. And so that's something that I think has helped me in writing nonfiction, is that I just don't need to be the star, even though I have written a lot of personal stuff in my books. But I'm not trying to make myself, I don't know, look a certain way.
I really think that the mycophile community in general, whether it's more the Have a Good Trip crew, or it's more the Microbia crew, or it's more the Mycophilia crew, I think everyone benefits from the concept of the editor or the revisioner or the challenger. Because I mean, even if you're just sitting around going, I want to make a new tincture and this is what I want it to do, in an unregulated supplement industry, sky's the limit. You can do no testing and bring it to market, or you can do a bunch of testing. And the people who are being thoughtful and being willing to accept criticism and get feedback on their ideas are safer, smarter, and likely bringing a more transparent product to market by thinking that way. So,
I think that's
yeah.
absolutely the case. I mean, in one of the things I talk about in Have a Good Trip is in looking at the an unregulated environment, what kind of walls or what kind of barriers exist that can protect somebody's claims or products. And at this point, it's customer feedback. Um, if there's not an opportunity to see realistically what folks have to say about a product or a therapy, then to me, it's maybe a little suspect. If someone's only putting up on their guiding page the incredible experiences people have, I don't know, 30% of people have bad trips. How did this guide handle the fact that somebody was, freaking out and stripping and trying to run out of the tripping room? I mean, that's, I think that um, the effort to have transparency in regards to your product or your services will only benefit because that's how you build public trust. Going back to that whole idea of, what it takes to have enough public trust to legalize.
That's where my thinking always goes with this is there that you just can't, because look at the news, right? All it takes is one article about the guy who jumped off a bridge on a trip, or one guy who shot himself while, on a heroic dose, to ruin 15 years of effort in certain people's minds.
That has to be in my opinion, that has to be reported. For like, let's go back to, maybe you remember, I think it was 2023, that Alaska Airlines pilot who tried to down the plane. He was a pilot who was catching like hitchhiking a ride on an Alaska Airlines flight with other pilots, which they're allowed to do. And he pulled like a lever that cuts off fuel to the engines, and then they stopped him, and everything was all right. But it turned out that he had had a psilocybin trip 48 hours before that, hadn't slept for 2 days, and felt like he was in a dream. Sounds like derealization to me and to others. So when that news was reported, there was this outpouring of criticism saying, well, he was taking psilocybin and it's psilocybin's fault. And then there was the community responding saying, well, psilocybin's out of your bloodstream in 12 hours. So, it's not psilocybin's fault. And I took real issue to those who tried to kind of abdicate responsibility or abdicate psilocybin's responsibility when indeed it can cause derealization, which is deeply upsetting. I meet people, unfortunately, rather frequently who have experienced it. But it's like those advocates are denying the felt experience and the really real experience of this pilot, because it could potentially, I think they're doing it because it could potentially harm the forward momentum of legalization. But that's like that's like a cover up. It's going to come out and people are going to be pissed and less responsive to the possibility of legalization, I think, if they feel like they've been snookered. And so it's really the whole thing about bad trips. I put a lot of energy into bad trips and writing about them and finding out everything I could about them. There isn't a lot of science to report on, but there's a lot of anecdotal materials. And I reported on them at length because, to not is going to, I think it has not only can it be harmful for people who want to use this drug, but it's just going to tank the movement unless everyone kind of says, okay, there are side effects.
Yeah, so I brought the idea up of these little articles that come up because, in my opinion, I want our community to be the first source of that information. I don't want it to be a sensationalized article, a little op-ed piece somewhere. I want it to be, oh, yeah, we know that. Yeah, the
Right.
psychedelic
People are
community has informed us about this responsibly. It makes you look, and it doesn't just make you look, you are behaving more ethically by being transparent in that way, and that only does the community a service.
I agree.
So yes, you have to talk about those things. And no, psilocybin doesn't work the same in everybody.
But I think there's a lot of residual kind of fear left over from what happened to LSD in the late 60s. Nobody they don't want the bad press to tank the forward momentum of legalization efforts. And I know I understand that, but I don't agree that it's in the best interest of either the movement or the individual who's looking into this drug.
Yeah, well, the minute you're just trying to exonerate and just deny responsibility as some ancillary person in the space, oh well, but it leaves the system, and oh this and oh that, and you don't sound trustworthy. You sound like someone who isn't investigating instead of going, well, yeah, I don't know all the facts, so we should look into that and find out more.
There's all kinds of ghosting. Like, you ever heard this phrase? There's no such thing as a bad trip, only challenging trips.
Oh
You
yeah.
heard
Oh
that?
yeah, yeah.
How about this one? You might not get the trip you want, but you get the trip you need. I'm
Very
calling BS
prescriptive.
on that,
Yes.
because what that's saying is, um, you didn't have a bad trip. You think you had a bad trip,
Right.
and the reason why, and so it's your fault that you have
Yeah.
the experience or the feelings about it
Yeah.
that you do. I
Oh,
just don't see
Garen,
that
yes.
a
Yes.
winning approach.
People do that all the time. They also do, oh, your dose wasn't right. I mean, so maybe sometimes that's true, but overall, there's just always, you're completely right. There's you did something wrong. Something wasn't set up properly. Don't you dare judge psilocybin.
Yeah, it's not that's not
Psilocybin is my savior, so please don't judge psilocybin. Yeah, but
there's in the book I wrote, I kind of came up with this little equation, which I like because it shows context when it comes to outcomes of using psilocybin. So the equation is dose plus intention minus risk equals the trip that you have. And the thinking there is the dose plus the intention. When somebody says, well, you didn't take the right dose, well, it depends on why you took a dose at all. So if you took a giant dose for you at a place like, say, a music festival where you don't have a way to get home, or you have to drive yourself, or any number of circumstances, that so associating, having a dose appropriate to your intention, and then take out the risk factors. The risk factor might be I have to drive, or the risk factor might be nobody is sober who I'm around, or the risk factor might be I'm doing this in a place where I could get busted or something. You know, that's going to dose plus intention minus risk, which all things you can control, will um, will will end up with the type of trip you have, maybe, because what's going on here and what's going on here, those are total wild cards at any given moment.
yeah, so the one of the things I talk about quite a bit is the idea that and I constantly framing a lot of this or contextualizing it against, FDA approved Western medicines and what I see, because I know for a fact people get prescribed medicines and they try to kill themselves. Like, and then you go, oh yeah, yeah, there was several incidences of suicidal ideation on this drug, and yet it was still not enough, and it got approved and all this stuff. So when people are, I don't know, sort of being precious about something that works great for them. If I'm on Adderall for ADHD and I love it, but I meet somebody that says, "Oh, I hated Adderall. I love Wellbutrin." What am I going to do? Chastise them? It would
Yeah.
make no sense. And yet there are people that are doing that, and it is exactly what you're saying. It's because they just want this new movement now to work, whether it's for themselves so that they don't have to, be in hiding growing a couple tubs of magic mushrooms and worry about some guy storming into their basement and arresting them, or whether it's because there's a financially motivated, that they have now decided this passion's going to be their job. This is how they make money. So they really don't want any negative attention brought to it. But I always tell people, do you understand the responsibility of telling somebody they should go do a 5 gram trip? Because I meet people who say 2 grams, 5 grams,
I have
10 grams.
yeah. I
And
think
I
it's
go, man, you are taking on a massive, massive responsibility when you start blindly advocating those level of trips.
mm,
Gotta be careful. Yes. But so to circle back, yes, the language. I love you're the first person that's ever said, let's be careful with our language because of kind of the what's loaded into it.
mm,
I really like that.
yeah,
I think that's
yeah.
important.
So I do talks, like I've kind of like so I do different kinds of talks, and I'm doing some talks at the Telluride Mushroom Festival this year, where I'm kind of a regular, I guess, um, and I do try to describe ways that you can spot advocacy, and to and spot claims and stuff like we spoke of earlier. I sort of see it like, what would Ralph Nader do in this circumstance? What approach would he take? Because even though it's feels like kind of harmful for some people to that the psychedelic world has become an industry, it has. And when you have people selling stuff, you have consumers. And when there's consumers who don't have any protections or regulations, which they don't, then you have to, I think, be your own advocate for your own well-being. And so that's one of the things that I'm sort of, taking around these days. That, and I'm also doing a talk on the FDA and psilocybin or psychedelic pharmaceutical companies and the challenges they face, because many times I've encountered folks in the psychedelic world who say, oh, the FDA suppresses psychedelic research, which in my estimation is complete nonsense. It's a misunderstanding of what the FDA does and how it's designed, and where it's at in this point in history. Acts of Congress can change the FDA's mandate or expand it. It's happened before, it'll likely happen again. But to assume that, I don't know, some nefarious anti-psychedelic folks are, in charge over there. Uh-uh. They're very excited in having a potential new drug to address a new category of drugs to address the many mental disorders that folks suffer from, and we have inadequate drugs for, um, for a great percentage of those people. So anyway, that's another thing I'm working on right now. They're all like spin-offs, that's what I do in my Substack, is spin-offs of stuff I learned in the book, and then I see in talking to people where their interests lie, and I try to understand how to put those interests in context, and I don't know, be helpful.
All right. I got a whole new Substack for you. I talk quite a bit about the idea that if I take a blood pressure medication, um, the majority, I think you can safely say, as a general rule, most drugs that are prescribed in the United States and in other countries, um, they have to prove that they generally work the same in most people. So if I take an ACE inhibitor, it's gonna lower my blood pressure by 10 to 20 points, and if you take it, it's gonna do the same thing. It doesn't matter if you're a woman, it doesn't matter if we're slightly different in age, it doesn't matter our weight. Generally speaking, all these classes of drugs, I mean, I can find 100 of exceptions to this rule, but generally speaking, the paradigm of drugs is that there is some dependability in what they do for the majority of people.
That's their job, is to, you're not going to pass a drug. They're not going to say, okay, you can market this drug to the American people unless those proofs. And the proofs are not like 100%. People, it drives me a little bit crazy when folks get pissed off at science for not being 100%, or studies for not giving them 100%. And I'm thinking, you've got to be flexible, because not only is it evolving all the time and we learn new things and there's changes and adaptations, but also, you know, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like the kind of anti-science crowd, which is a portion of our community in the psychedelic world, has a problem with living on the edge of the unknown. Is it 100%? No, but I understand if someone has a chronic illness, it's very frustrating to not be able to get an answer. But that doesn't mean that an answer is being withheld. It might mean there's not an answer yet.
So now here's the new Substack. Even if you just limited it down to psychotropic medications, a mood stabilizer, it gets approved because it works for a lot of people. And now you have psilocybin coming along. It's a drug that behaves differently than all other drugs, and that's what makes it amazing. But that's also what makes it challenging for both the DEA and the FDA then to start making some decisions on it, because it works so differently. It might save my life and it might make that guy jump off a bridge.
If the FDA approves a psychedelic drug, like a psilocybin analog of some sort, then DEA would have to reschedule, because it's a proven, so that's one way toward legalization, or for decriminalizing or whatever, for rescheduling, let's say. I'm so glad. I think you're going to like my next Substack very much, because I was at the opera. I had a friend who had bought 4 tickets and he couldn't go. So he gave 2, me and my husband, we went. And then there was 2 other women sitting next to us. And of course, in the opera, you can't say a thing. I mean, if you cough, all these people turn around and give you a dirty look. So you're very quiet. But then during intermission, everyone's chatting and we're New Yorkers. So I turned to the woman next to me and I said, so what do you do? And she said, I'm the clinical trials designer for Compass Pathways, which is one of the really big psychedelic pharmaceutical companies. And I was like, what? I was just totally focused on her. And she and I kind of struck up a friendship. And I told her how frustrating it was, how many people that I had encountered in the psychedelic community were frustrated with the FDA, and we're feeling. And this is just right after Lyco's petition was turned down for MDMA for PTSD, and I said, I really want to write a Substack that shows the entire FDA system, so you can see how a drug travels through all these steps, and then show where psychedelics are very hard to stick in. Yeah. And so that's what we're doing. We're on the final draft right now. And so I'll be putting up, it's insanely long. It's like 6,000 words, but it really lays it all out. So you know what the problems are and the problems they're facing. And she's been fantastic. She left Compass and now she's over at Medica, I guess. That's Paul Stamets's company. And then, but Compass just concluded phase 3 of one of its phase 3 trials. So they're moving forward. But there are a lot of challenges. The kind of things that have to be kind of rethought about is, for example, what is an adverse effect? So if you're testing an antacid and you hallucinate, that's an adverse effect. If you're taking an antacid for acid indigestion and you start like tripping, that's an adverse effect. So how does that translate when you're talking about a psychedelic drug? It's a whole new context in terms of, so these things like adverse effects, they're lists, of stuff. It's not interpretive. It can't be, not if you're dealing with public health. That you have to be based on, statistics and data. So, the real heartbreak of it is, someone like the Secretary of Health comes out and he's pro psychedelic research, but then undermines the ability of the FDA to actually accommodate and learn and change to, well, learn and change to accommodate a psychedelic drug. So, it's like a little bit crazy,
Yeah.
but that's how it's going right now.
Yeah, what you just said about if you take an antacid and it causes hallucinations, that would be considered an adverse effect.
Yeah.
That example highlights the issue with psilocybin and any psychedelic drug used in a therapeutic way.
There's another one. The gold standard for an antacid is the double-blind placebo study. So what that means is that one group of people everybody has acid ingestion. One group of people take the antacid, one group of people do not, but nobody knows, including the researchers, who's got the drug and who doesn't. And then they're able to look at the results in a way that's completely devoid of prejudice. But when you're testing a psychedelic, people know when they're tripping.
Oh,
It's a real problem.
yes. Yes, yes, yes. Now, so that also so and this has nothing to do with psychedelics necessarily, but if you really get deep on FDA approved drugs and you look at the control group, there are let's take a blood pressure medication that's 87% effective in reducing BP by 10 points in all subjects. It gets approved. It's a new great drug that is in the arsenal of cardiologists and GPs and all this stuff. But if you look at the placebo group, their blood pressures might have been reduced by 10
Yeah.
points in 74% of them.
Yeah. The placebo effect is
That's a whole
very
nother. I mean, I know there's been books written,
rare.
and that's a whole nother thing.
Oh my God.
But
It's
that doesn't work. You can't. You just pointed out the thing that's the most important, and it continues to highlight why this is such a challenging drug class.
it's nobody's
Is you
fault. It's
can't
just
double blind it because people know if they are or are not tripping.
so they can't use the gold standard. They meaning the petitioner, right? The company that wants to get their drug to market. They have to create another way of showing efficacy and safety. And so one of the things that's going on is they're showing incremental doses, or so there'll be whatever 5 milligram, 15 milligram, and 25 milligram doses, and then they'll compare, or they'll put in another drug to mix it up, like niacin or something, which causes tingling and whatever. So that's all of that has to be reviewed with FDA experts. When you have a drug that that you want to bring to market, you get assigned like all of these experts who help from the FDA end. So statisticians, MDs, pharmacologists, chemists. I mean, it goes on and on and on. This whole team looks at what you're trying to do from the lens of their expertise. And of course, the idea of undermining that, I mean, that's what's protecting our drug supply. I mean, it's not perfect. And yeah, it causes the more people who take a drug, the more likely these different effects, they'll have different adverse effects. That's why if 1 million people are taking a drug, and some of them might have suicidal ideation out of it. And then for legal reasons, that's why you hear that on the commercial, even though it's like really statistically a very small possibility.
And in all those outliers, you can't ever they truly can't ever prove that this is a correlation causation thing. Again, somebody in a trial might have died, and they just can't prove conclusively it wasn't related to that drug they were testing. So they have to then in their advertisement say, and it might kill you, even though they don't have proof of that. But don't forget the lawyers. That team also includes some lawyers in there. Yeah.
But in the stage 4 trials, once the drug is at market, there's still data that's accumulated about it, because a drug that a phase 3 trial might have a few thousand people in it, and then if it's determined safe and efficacious for a few thousand people, then it can go to market. But it's only once it's in the market that you see these really, really large cohorts of people who are taking it of all sorts, with all kinds of comorbidities of different things that aren't necessarily checked. You can't check for everything, in the process of going through your FDA petition. I mean, they check to see if it's going to cause tumors or reproductive problems. They look at your liver cells. That's an in vitro stage. Anyway, read my Substack. It's
Yeah.
free.
All right. Oh, well, don't you worry. We're going to be on that Substack. But this little rabbit hole we went down only proves that it's easy to go, we want it legal now. We want, give it to us, give it to us, give it to us. But this is a whole new beast. This is a very challenging drug class to both go through FDA approval on. But then also, if I'm the DEA and I know what my job is, I got to be real careful about moving things down in schedule. That's a bolder move. Moving it up, that's a safe move. Move it all up. Move it all up. That's safe, right? Cool. For example, in the ER, if older people on blood thinners, if they get a nosebleed, they get a cold, they're blowing their nose. Next thing you know, they got this terrible nosebleed. We apply pressure. We can't get it to stop. Maybe we use a rhino rocket. We can also use, depending upon where it is, nasal cocaine. Right? Cocaine has a medical use. If I put just the right amount in your nose, it stops your nosebleed. If you put a few rails in, you're having a good time on some cocaine, right? So that this is what we got to now do in reframing psilocybin is contextualize it in a therapeutic and medical sense, and in order to do that, it's trickier than any of these other drugs are.
It's a new, yeah. It has all new challenges, But I think that also the legalization for adult use is another story, and not and worthy of a discussion. Um, so that's an adjacent track that many municipalities and states, or not many states, but lots more municipalities are taking. Um, to be kind of doesn't think it has to be one way or the other, like everything in life, there's multiple causes and multiple effects.
So I brought up the knockers you talked about. Now I have seen photos of guys with their super soakers with spore water, and I know these guys exist, and especially on the Pacific Northwest. I also have had several instances where people will post and they're portraying it like they just found these mushrooms and they're trying to get an ID on it. And you come to find out later is that they'd made a patch and they maybe aren't entirely sure it is the mushroom that they tried to knock up in that area. Um, so this is definitely a thing. This is also a thing in context to the notion of invasive species and is this good or bad? I, I feel like you have been around these knockers enough that I want you to tell me a little bit more about them and more about the thoughts you had in spending some time with these guys and in this agenda of creating these spaces for these precious mushrooms they love so much.
Yeah. Well, I met a bunch of knockers that are mainly out of Seattle. And when I was out for other purposes, I wrote one of these fellows and said, "Would you mind sending me a GPS of one of the spots you've knocked?" And he said, "No problem." And he sent me one, and then another, and then another, and something like 50 different spots appeared in my phone. And I was with a colleague, and we started driving around and visiting these spots and seeing where they had moved the myceliated wood chips for it tends to be, well, anyway, we're moving myceliated wood chips from a depleted wood chip pile to a new wood chip pile, a fresh one. So the mycology is really interesting, because psilocybe are secondary decomposers. They don't decompose like a tree that just fell in the woods. They're coming in a little later, after either mechanical forces like rain has started to break down the tree, or other critters, other fungi, for example. So they are particular to things that are that are partially decomposed, which is why psilocybe cubensis likes herbivore poop. So it's still plant matter, but it's already kind of broken down to a degree. Then there's it's a kind of an interesting thought when people say, "Oh, this knocker's moving around these myceliated wood chips," because the wood chip is like a partially decomposed wood, right? Is a type of moving species around, and it's irresponsible. But actually, I have two thoughts on that. One is that the psilocybe species are ones that have tended to follow in our footsteps. So when humans cleared land to raise cattle, it created more habitat for psilocybe cubensis. When we started to take down woods for that land to create those meadows, we created more habitat because of fallen timber or dead timber for the psilocybe. And the same thing goes for like using landscaping chips in cities. By using them, we are creating habitat. So it is in a way, and this is my other thought, is that it's a type of fundamental cultivation or domestication of the mushroom. Not, I would say, for your cultivation audience, this is like how cultivation probably started for everything. And that is selecting wild species and moving them into places that were more convenient, or nurturing those wild spaces by clearing weeds and watering, whatever. It's like a kind of bridge type cultivation between row cultivation or greenhouse cultivation or tub cultivation and wild. And that's what the knockers do. They're cultivating on a landscape scale. And I think it's just very provocative, because what they also do is they select for phenotypes. So because they're also eating these. I mean, when I go out with those guys, they're like eating mushrooms all the time. They're eating them like, when you go strawberry picking and you pop a couple of strawberries, and then they do the same thing. But they become very familiar with the different phenotypes that are emerging, like both morphologically, are they kind of chubby, or are they like skinny? Different variations on the species. Often these are like stuntii and not like the wood lovers, not like subgenerosa. What's that? Organosa. So they and they will also select phenotypes for a body load, for how they respond when you trip on them. So it could be a matter of body load, or is it more light and silly, or whatever the effects are. And so they're nurturing these phenotypes, and in a way, if it goes on long enough, you'll end up with the evolution of even new species. It could happen. Might take a while, but it could happen. With bacteria, it happens like that. Hours. You can have new species evolve. It's like species concept doesn't work for bacteria. Not really. So they were, so I followed them around and reported on what they were doing. And in my chapter on cultivation, it's kind of, sort of where I start.
It is such a odd particular sect within the grand scheme of mycophiles.
This one fellow told me that the way they know where to knock to find a new patch is they have a mole in the landscaping company that services the city of Seattle. So the guy calls up and goes, "Yeah, we're going to send a bunch of wood chips all around the public library." And then they're on their bikes and they're over there and they're going to move some mycelium around. They also will fill balloons with with spore and water, as combined, and then chuck it over the gates into the landscaping, onto the piles of wood chips in the landscaping yard. And there, it's known for. Oh no, they are right. They're trying to inoculate the landscaping company's mountains of wood chips. I'll tell you quickly a funny story about I went to a foray and there was a lot of psilocybin different species up, and there was some folks, some knockers, who said, we saw some psilocybin stuntii, and let's go over and look at them. Maybe we can collect some samples. So I drive over. I've got a car full of people and, blue jeans and fish t-shirts and all that stuff. But they really have like excellent mycological knowledge. Some of them are chemists, some are ecologists, but they all look like they've just emerged from a fish concert. So we get to this location that is a little suburban house with a chain link fence around it, rather tall one. And in the yard, it's all the stones, little pebbles and stones that have made a kind of garden, right? A sort of pattern in the ground. And growing amidst the stones are like thousands and thousands of stuntii. And so we park, they said park across the street. And then they go, now we wait until the owner departs. And then we jump over the fence. And I was like, no fucking way. I'm 65 years old. I'm not going to jump over that fence. So, what? Yeah. Yeah. They were like, that's how they did it. And so I went over and I knocked on the door. And there's a woman about my age, and I said, well, we're amateur mycologists. And I gestured toward this line of people who are like, waiting to pick the mushrooms. And I said, we are interested in these mushrooms. We want to collect them, take pictures and things like that. And she was like, oh my God, get rid of them. I wanted to throw bleach on them. They're ruining my landscaping. She gave us bags. I found out about her, creepy neighbor and her son who's got, lost his job. And, it became this sort of social thing. I worked that angle, and all my colleagues came running across the street and filled up the bags. And then we were like, why are they growing on the stones, among these stones? And so I asked her, what's underneath the stones? And she said, sawdust. And then we were like, where'd you get the sawdust? Because I'm imagining piles, mountains of sawdust covered with psilocybin stuntii. They were all coming up right at that time. And she said, yeah, I got it from this nursery down the street called Basket Case Nursery, which, you can't make that up. So after gathering all the mushrooms, we headed to the nursery, and we were going to try to investigate, but those fences were way too high and they were closed. But the lesson is, when it comes to mushroom hunting, no matter what you're hunting, it just pays to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least ask first. And then, if they say no, then come back at 4 in the morning and, wearing all black. I mean, at least try.
Most people don't know about fungi and mushrooms and are curious to learn if they don't feel intimidated. And I guess it helps to have a, kind of older lady come along and bridge that gap, because, the rest of my crew is much younger. And, but it definitely, when it comes to foraging, we think that everybody knows about these mushrooms, all of them, the psilocybes, but also the culinary mushrooms, and folks don't. Even though it's become very popular, the folks that have maitake growing under their mature oaks in their yard, they don't know. It's always worthwhile to knock, say hello, ask if you can share the mushrooms.
If it's right on the, if all I got to do is pull off the side of the road and grab that big hunk of chickens or hens or whatever, I probably just am going to do that. But yeah, if I have to actually walk onto the property to any degree, yeah, of course I go.
We
Yeah.
think in the mycological world that everybody knows what we know. And it's not the case at all. It's just growing now. Our bubble is really expanding. But when I wrote Mycophilia 15 years ago, and I sat down next to somebody at a dinner party, and I said, so what do you do? And I said, well, I'm into molds and mushrooms. They'd be like looking for somewhere else to sit. Now, if I say, oh, well, I just wrote a book about psychedelic mushrooms, that's it. I'm trapped. I'm answering questions for the next 2 hours. So we really are seeing an evolution, but the bottom line is most of the world doesn't know about mycology and they don't know about microbiology, and it's a shame because they're incredibly beautiful subjects.
I agree. Well, when you wrote Microbia 2018, is that? Let me
It came
see.
out in 2018, right? I
Yeah,
guess.
2018.
Yeah.
That I mean, it was pretty timely.
Mhm.
This is when there's just sort of an awakening going on of why we should think about viruses a little bit more,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you know the gut microbiome and all this stuff. So I just at every turn you seem to write the book. You're just in the you are a journalist. You're in the right place at the right time, and you're paying attention, and you're going, "Up, this is going to be a thing."
Nope,
And
that's not how it is at all for me.
no,
Uh-uh.
so it's more serendipitous.
No, it's neat. It's absolutely like I get fascinated and I
You
go
just
down
okay,
that wormhole.
okay,
If I was more calculating, I and I don't mean that in a bad sense, but
yeah.
if I was more calculating, I would position my books better in the marketplace. Because I have ultimately like small audiences, I don't have these my books have legs, like I'll sell a lot of books over the course of 10 years, but it's ultimately a small audience because I'm not pushing buttons. I'm not like saying, I'm not allowing I'm not allowing for any of the jargon that makes people think they're reading what they want to read. I don't have that sort of stuff. And I'm really, as a writer, as I said earlier, curiosity is destiny. And I write the books because I'm curious about the subject. If I wasn't, then it would be really hard for me to do. If I wasn't utterly fascinated, because it does take a lot of research to pull these books off. But when it came to like Mycophilia, I was going to the forays and going to the festivals and hunting mushrooms and all that way years before I wrote a book about it. Same thing with microbiology, same thing with psychedelics. I've been involved with psychedelics for, a long time.
All right. So what you're saying is you're not, and I really appreciate this. I have a version of this I do too, which is I purposely don't want to jump on the bandwagon of the day or of the week or the month. So what you're saying is you chose purposely not to call this book Have a Trip just like Maria Sabina used to give. Right?
uh,
You don't wanna grab the buzzwords. I love that you are purposely not doing that. I think that
yeah,
is
yeah.
so
That's just not who I am. And I've been called like an underdog in the mushroom world and all that. That's fine with me. I just, I'm not like, I'm not trying to make a career out of it, which sounds crazy because I am, but not really, not in a careerist sort of sense. And so I'm not saying, okay, gut microbiome is hot right now. I'm going to do a story the way I would if I was an editor of a magazine. That's a different deal. But writing books, I'm on these books for years before they're published. It takes a year after I finished writing Have a Good Trip, came out in 2024, end of 2024. I finished writing it in 2023. So it's a whole year of housekeeping, fact checking, well, not fact checking, but copy editing and proofreading and then publish, all that stuff that goes in legal vetting. That was a long, it was a long side. I asked the lawyer, it was like 12 hours with a lawyer to go through this book. And afterwards, we were both like exhausted. And I said, "Have you ever had to do so much vetting for a book?" And she thought about it. And she goes, "Yeah, the Horace Mann book. Do you remember that book?" The Horace Mann book was a book um, that uh, accused a generation um, of educators at a private high school in New York City of abusing students. So, ugh, yeah, lawsuit city.
yeah,
Um,
but that's their job. That's their
oh
job.
yeah,
It's okay.
that's
You
why
don't want your publishing house to go under just because the lawyers didn't get to
that.
do their job.
We're not
Yeah.
gonna let that happen. And
No.
also, I was surprised by how careful, but things that I would do, like I'd write, you know, 3 grams of psilocybin psilocybin cubensis might do X, Y, and Z to me, but that doesn't mean it'll do X, Y, and Z to you. And they said, no, that's I couldn't even use their yeah, I couldn't even use you. They would say, no, say to someone else. So there was this, the thing I learned from the lawyers is to constantly put space between myself and the reader, which is not necessarily like what I want to do, but at the end of the day, I think it helps people. It just takes all that unintentional, the coziness of language is an unintentional kind of advocacy too. And so that had to be removed. Mhm.
Well, and then they always tell you as a writer, don't talk less I, more you. So
Mhm.
there's that tendency to, if you're smart, want to engage the specific reader as the you. But yeah, man, for me so far, I really love this idea of being careful not to advocate too much and turn yourself into a used car salesman for psilocybin. That's like the worst thing I think anybody can become. It's the same for religion. Like, if I love my religion, the best thing I can do is just be that guy that loves his religion. The minute I got a shirt that says, repent now, follow Jesus, come to my church, you've automatically just become like the used car salesman for Jesus. And
Well, there really is psychedelic evangelism, and it's, I think it's helpful to know how to be able to spot it and also to control it in oneself, because not so sure of, what the outcomes would always be so good, that there could be bad outcomes as a result of that, and, I don't know if you wanna have that on your conscience.
I don't. Yeah, some people do. I remember going to a Spread the Spores event in Detroit. This is right after Detroit had decriminalized. And, so somebody found some old, or not old, but just a closed down head shop. And they decided to do this little Spread the Spores event. And I overheard some guys talking, and they were talking real slick. Oh, yeah, our lawyers got this. And so we're just a church, and this is just a sacrament. And so we can do this. And I was listening on the whole conversation. And if you're listening, shame on you because you're taking advantage of people. But it was the whole racket so that they could grow and sell mushrooms, basically, under the guise of a religion.
But there's also, I reported on churches that were very, in my estimation, very authentic in their relationship with their congregations. They were using the drug to help people deal with the stuff that priests, that do the job of priests, help them through grief and help them through, divorces and illnesses and fears and insecurities. And so, and these are communities. I mean, there's all kinds of tripping groups, and lots of them, those of them that just design themselves as churches, can be more in the public. And I don't think the DEA seems to be that interested in pursuing churches. It's problematic. It's only if the church is like a nuisance in the neighborhood, like they're not securing their drugs or they've got a lot of cars parked everywhere, whatever. That's when law enforcement seems to get involved. But the truth is that very rarely I mean, to my knowledge, not at all. Psilocybin's just not involved in gang violence, or there's not a lot of guns and stuff. So people, so law enforcement is not going to prioritize, a little tripping church of some sort, and they have the protections of the Religious Freedom Act. So you know that is a kind of growing area. There's a wonderful attorney who works on that. I forget the name of her organization, but her name is Allison Hoots, and she advises these groups that want to become churches. And then there's many other tripping groups of all sorts, integration groups of great variety, which I write about at length in the book, in the part of the book that's about trip types, and these are like the community trip types.
Yeah, because of my history, I'm very leery and cautious of those. Although I do know there is actually another community in Detroit that seems to be extremely positive and do a lot of good for a lot of people. So yeah, I don't want to be entirely negative, but you should be cautious. You should be cautious. Anytime a large group of people are selling you on anything, you should always be cautious.
Well, there's definitely this sort of cult, there's this kind of dark sibling of the psychedelic community is the cult community, and or different cults, and so yeah, that's following charismatics. I mean, this is a problem that we see that I've noted with guides, because like people that call themselves shamans. So, a shaman evolves from their community to serve that community. Whereas a neo shaman is someone who has come to uh, believe that they have healing services to offer and are in search of a community. And to be able to, and the problem with neo shamans is that in search of a community, there can be this slip into a kind of cult like environment where people are, I don't know, talked into having sex and all that kind of stuff. It seems to happen a lot in the, not a lot, but periodically in the ayahuasca communities. These neo shamans, they're not, see, if a shaman arrives, emerges from a community, they are also, that community is kind of policing them. They step out of line, they're out of work. And these folks will often have lineages where their mother or father was a shaman and so on. So they've got deep ties within the community doing those jobs. Um, that's, we say shaman, people that are self, that have like learned on their own, or have taken some courses or whatever, that are saying they're a shaman now, really are a different species. Not that they aren't great healers, there's, I'm not talking about that, but it's just the organization that they are seeking to be a part of, has the potential for abuse, and people should maybe be aware of that. If they know it exists, then they have a little more information, I think, before deciding to move on to their farm, whatever.
Before deciding to move onto their private secluded farm. Yes, I agree. I have unfortunately heard some stories about those situations. And
Mhm.
they don't always have to be horror stories, but I have heard some pretty unpleasant stories. And yeah, it's you got to be careful. This again, just to always make sure I'm doing my job as a host and celebrating what I love about you, and why I was so happy to have you on is your very much presenting as objective and transparent and clear view of these worlds as you can. And having that information is good. People make better decisions that way. And I made the mistake of saying that you were sort of on top of the trend that was about to emerge. Even though previously you had said, you just sort of followed your curiosity. And when you said that earlier on, it made me think like, oh yeah, this is definitely in Microbia. This is definitely in Have a Good Trip. Um, Talk a little bit about it, and let me preface it with this. I have a lot of people in the community who seem to have this wellspring of passion for mycology, for cultivation, for taxonomy, for it always goes back to the old fungi, but right, they have this passion, and I see a lot of people that don't know exactly how to channel it in productive ways. But I love this idea that your curiosity is your destiny. Talk to me about that.
That's a very Gary Linkoffian notion, isn't it? Gary Linkoff was my mentor, and his whole thing was, give up everything. You don't need that much money. You don't even need a car. You don't need a cottage on the beach. You just need to be into mushrooms. And he was wonderful that way. It was, he was referring to sort of Thoreau and that Enlightenment era of just, you find joy and community and the divine in nature, and then mushrooms being particularly humble, and bacteria even more humble expressions of nature. But I would I would say, like, for me, being a writer, obviously it lends itself to pursuing my curiosity, and allowed for and allowed for a degree of mastery. But if I was going to advise another writer, or just any person who asked me, I would say that the trick is mastery. So if you have a curiosity, or let's say, multiple curiosities, you're interested in all the bioluminescent species, let's say, of all critters, insects and plants and mushrooms. If you if your curiosity opens the door, it's your mastery that really walks you through it. So that entails, paying attention, joining clubs. I highly recommend that people join their local mycological societies. I mean, they're great. You learn a lot. You connect to other people who are involved in weird stuff like this little ascomycetes that look like vomit on sticks. And, people are all over the map, and it can really enhance your experience. If you're looking to make a business out of it, however, that is a much more challenging, since mycology is a science and that would require going to school and becoming a mycologist. But you can do that. I mean, not a lot, but a few people who have read my books have said, I got interested and now I'm a mycologist. It's fantastic. Um, but you could very well, have a be oop, you could very well be paying your rent by, running a hardware store, and still be fascinated and have a hobby in these other, in a science of some sort. That's your joy. I mean, that's your destiny. Whether it leads to a business or not depends a lot on what area your mastery is in.
But we live in an era right now where there's a bit of immediate expertise.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Or so while there's also that, then there's also sort of this like growing, not hatred, but sort of shunning of experts and expertise. I see this with physicians who have to literally argue and justify the treatment plan that they're coming up with. And when they explain it, they're being argued like they're using logic and reason and 100 years of medical science as justification for why they're doing what they're doing, and then the patient is on a different level arguing points that really are not like they're logical fallacies, and they don't make sense, and they're not, but they have to engage in these arguments. So I think you bring up an interesting point about mastery, and that if that's your curiosity and a pursuit of mastery, um because you're never the master, right? All these masters don't even think they're masters. They're pursuing mastery of these things.
Exactly. If you're authentic um, about learning, then one of the first lessons is there's always going to be people who know more than you, and those are the ones you want to pay attention to. Um, but these are moral lessons, ones that I don't feel like I'm not a psychologist, right? I can only speak for myself. But it's if you get for me, when I got really interested in mycology, I just shut up. I just shut the fuck up and listened to people who knew more than me. And that's how I learned. When it came to microbiology, I needed a little bit more structure because I just didn't understand cell biology at all. Um, uh, for me, I found that the path to mastery is all right, sort of jargony sounding right now, but the path to mastery is humility.
What's fascinating about this idea of humility is you can also look at humility, right? Humility as a term gets frequently linked into spiritual practice and religious experience. And there's a reason for that. It is also a kind of reverence to be humble. It is an attitude, right? And like you're just saying, you just close your mouth. Are you here to learn? If you are, then you close your mouth and you use these. And I mean, heck, in Mycophilia, I think it's some of the early pages. Yeah, so chapter 1, forays and festivals. You literally paint it out, right? If somebody picks up this book and they only read the first chapter, you've already given them some solid advice. Go on forays and go to some festivals when you can. You're going to make friends with people who are as curious about these things as you are.
Yeah, and you learn
Phew.
from each other. I mean, peer-to-peer
Yes,
learning is great, although it can lead to a lot of misinformation. Um, Putting that in perspective, yeah, you can, those forays are a wonderful way because experts come and talk about
yeah,
their mastery of a particular fascination or curiosity. And then, patch it all together. That's what I do is I listen to all these different folks and then I patch it all together to create a sense of the community.
I like that. Have you ever been on a foray where I'm sure you know this type. There's the retired physician who's a mycologist. He's really into taxonomy. He can reference all the books. He knows who did the type description of that and all that. And then there's the backwoods country bumpkin guy. And he doesn't know any of the Latin, he knows where they are. He IDs them in a split second. He can, oh no no, that's not Galerina marginata, that's this. He has a kind of knowledge that is very wise and experiential. And if I've on a couple occasions gotten to watch those two people interact, and it is fascinating how the highly educated taxonomically driven minded person is just salivating over every little thing that country bumpkin guy has to say. But then when the guy's trying to go, oh well, here's the Latin name of that. He's just like, oh cool, yeah, okay, great. I mean, I there's something fascinating about what you learn as a person watching these different types of people express their love of this thing, right? For me, it's very different. I like to mountain bike. But it doesn't there is not the same dynamic that you get as you get on a foray. It's just we go down the hill, we go up the hill, who's faster, who's slower, who handled a difficult patch the best. But there's not a lot of like wisdom about self or about people that occurs in that hobby that I have. Whereas in mushrooms and foraging, you learn so much about people.
Yeah. It really it's Mycophilia talks a lot about the community of mycophiles, and, there's a lot of folks that were dominant in that community, and I don't mean dominant as in, like, they make the most money or anything, but folks whose voices it was a small community. 15 years ago, it was a much smaller community. But we had this, I many times saw that same dynamic, mycologists versus amateur mycologists. Sometimes the mycologists in those days were kind of snobby toward the amateurs. But the truth of the matter is, the amateurs were the citizen scientists who were collecting all this important information, and able to share it. They were the ones who were saying, "Well, we found this mushroom here," and then the mycologists in their labs with it's when it's a collaboration that it's the most effective, and that's one of the great things about, really, I don't know of a science where that doesn't happen. Like even astronomy, amateur astronomers will report into the community that's monitored or paid or observed by the professionals, the people who do nothing but this. So there's a collaboration that expands your knowledge, but also expands your, social life. I mean, I have a lot of, you know, quirky friends who are mycologists and in the mycological world. And I just treasure those relationships. I'm fully embedded. I'm not like, I didn't just kind of parachute into any of these subjects. I'm involved personally, in these different worlds, these different kingdoms.
Well, I'm going to be making sure the links to all these books are available in the description. People can go check them out.
I'll put my Substack in there too because it's free. And we're going to, Joyce and I are doing this big FDA piece, which I think will be really helpful for a lot of folks in the psychedelic world to put it all in perspective.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
Okay. Oh, yeah. That's going to be in there. We're going to put all the stuff, all the websites, all the Substacks, everything. Yes, it's going to all be in there. All right. Well, thank you so much. This was a blast. I feel like we could, we barely talked about 1% of what we could have talked about, but I think this was a good time. I had a great time.
Me too. Me too. Thank you so much.
All right, guys, huge thanks to Eugenia Bone for joining us and sharing not just her stories, but her way of looking at the world. Have a Good Trip isn't just another mushroom book. It's proof that curiosity is contagious and that mushrooms are the perfect excuse to catch it. If this episode made you think, laugh, or finally Google monokaryon versus dikaryon, do me a solid. Subscribe, like it, and hit that bell so you never miss an episode. And if you really want to support what we do here, especially now that most of the deep cultivation content lives off the algorithm's radar, check out patreon.com/MycoGeeky. That's how we keep the lights on, the plates poured, and those weird mushroom friendships alive. Drop a comment below. What part of Eugenia's story resonated with you most? Until next time, stay curious, stay cultivating, and as always, go grow some mushrooms.
Have a good trip. Don't let it slip. Breathe in deep. Feel the cosmos rip. Stay grounded. Stay wise. Watch the stars bloom in your eyes. Clock melting, dollars dream. Flowing through the river of a lucid stream. Third eye blinking, the truth unfolds. Ancient secrets in the fun, your modes. Walls breathing, or am I alive? Feels like the universe took a dive.